The first warm wind of spring came earlier than usual that year. It carried the smell of wet soil and blooming grass, and for the first time in months, I kept my windows open at night. I had just moved into a small rental house near the edge of a quiet neighborhood, a place surrounded by tall trees and the faint hum of frogs at dusk. The yard was overgrown, but a line of yellow lilacs bloomed wildly along the fence, their scent spreading through the house no matter how tightly I closed the doors. I moved there alone after the winter had dragged along in the city. I wanted quiet, a slower rhythm, something that felt like breathing again. The first few days were peaceful. I would wake up early, brew coffee, and sit on the back steps, watching the mist lift from the grass. There was something soft about those mornings until I noticed the figure. It wasn't sudden. It began subtly, with movement at the edge of the yard. A person, maybe, walking near the lilac bushes. I assumed it was a neighbor cutting through, or someone walking their dog. But each time I looked up, they were gone. I never saw where they came from, or where they went. Only the sound remained, the faint crunch of footsteps on damp soil. By the third morning, I decided to check. I walked out barefoot, coffee still in hand, feeling the cold earth between my toes. The air smelled sweet with the flowers, heavy in a way that felt almost too alive. I looked over the fence and saw no one, only the thick lilac branches trembling slightly, as if someone had just brushed past them. That evening, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Spring air does that, it wakes things up, even imagination. I made a simple dinner, chicken and green beans, and watched the light fade from the kitchen window. The yellow lilacs glowed in the dimness, like small lanterns. When I turned away, I caught something in the reflection of the glass, someone standing among the flowers. I spun around. Nothing was there. I slept poorly that night. The smell of lilacs seemed stronger, thick enough to taste. At some point past midnight, I heard the screen door creak from the kitchen. I froze, listening. Then, soft footsteps on the floorboards. I sat up, heart pounding, and called out a shaky hello. That sounded smaller than I meant it to. Silence, only the faint rustle of leaves outside. I told myself it was wind, an animal, something explainable. But the next morning, the back door was ajar. The lock wasn't broken, the frame not forced. It was as if someone had simply walked in and left quietly. I called the landlord, a man named George, who lived 2 streets over. He came by around noon, cheerful and talkative. "Old houses shift," he said, testing the hinges. "Sometimes the latches don't catch right. That's all." He tightened the screws, gave me a friendly smile, and suggested I keep the door bolted at night. I did. But the nights didn't get better. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, the air would grow cold. Not cold, like it had dropped 30 degrees in minutes. The lilac scent vanished when that happened, replaced by a faint smell of wet metal. I would hear faint dragging noises on the porch. Then nothing, always nothing. After a week, I started leaving lights on, even during sleep. It didn't help much. One evening, while washing dishes, I noticed the window screen had been pushed inward from outside. The metal frame bent slightly. I touched it. The edge was damp, like someone had handled it with wet hands. That same night, I heard humming. A low, tuneless hum, coming from the backyard. I froze at the sound. It wasn't mechanical or distant, but human, soft, as if someone were trying not to be heard. I turned off the kitchen light and peered through the glass. The lilac bushes moved in waves. Something or someone was standing between them. I couldn't make out a face, just a shape, a dark outline swaying slightly. The humming stopped. For a moment, the entire yard seemed to hold its breath. Then, a whisper of movement, the faint sound of fabric brushing wood, and the figure was gone. I didn't go outside for 2 days. When I finally stepped out again, it was morning. The air was warm and still, bees hovering lazily near the lilacs. But there, in the middle of the yard, lay a small pile of dirt, freshly dug. Not big enough for anything large, just a small mound with disturbed soil. Something about it made me uneasy. I knelt down, brushed the surface, and uncovered a small object, a key. Old, rusted, the kind used decades ago. It wasn't mine. That night I placed it on the counter, but by morning it was gone. I searched everywhere, the sink, the floor, even the trash. It had vanished. I called George again, half embarrassed. "Someone's been in the yard," I told him. He paused before answering, his tone softer now. "That old place gets a lot of stories," he said carefully. "You probably just need a better lock." But his voice carried something else, an unease, maybe even guilt. Later that day, I saw him standing outside near the edge of my property, staring at the lilacs. When I stepped out to ask what he was doing, he turned quickly and muttered something about checking drainage lines before walking away. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside again. I stayed on the couch, lights on, blanket around me. Hours passed before I drifted off. When I woke, faint morning light was coming through the curtains, and there, near the door, were wet footprints. Bare, small, and leading toward the kitchen. I followed them slowly. They stopped at the counter, right where the key had been. I don't remember calling George. I just remember him arriving quickly this time, a flashlight in hand, even though it was broad daylight. He checked the yard, the porch, the lilacs. Then, quietly, he asked, "Did you dig up anything?" I told him about the key. He nodded once, then told me not to go near the bushes anymore. When I asked why, he just said, "Those flowers came from another property. My wife planted them years ago." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "After she died, I moved them here. Thought it'd make the place look alive again." That night, I couldn't sleep at all. The humming returned, faint, but closer this time, like it was inside the house. I got up, trembling, and went to the kitchen. The window over the sink was open again, curtains moving slightly with the breeze. I walked over and closed it. When I turned around, someone was standing by the back door, a woman. She wasn't transparent or glowing or any of the things you imagine when you think of ghosts. She just looked wrong, too still. Her hair hung damp over her shoulders, and her hands dripped water onto the floor. She looked at me, not with malice, but with a kind of confusion, like she didn't know how she'd gotten there. I couldn't move. She raised one hand, slow and deliberate, and pointed toward the lilacs. Then she was gone. I left the house the next morning, packed only what I could fit in the car, and drove until I couldn't smell the flowers anymore. I called George once, a week later, to tell him I'd moved out. He didn't seem surprised. Before hanging up, he said quietly, "The lilacs are blooming early again this year." I didn't answer. Now, every spring, when the air turns soft and the lilacs start to open, I think about that house, the open window, the wet footprints, the faint humming that came from the yard. And sometimes, when the wind carries that same heavy sweetness, I swear I can still hear it. That night, the air felt heavier. Even with the windows open, the cabin was damp and cool. Emma fell asleep fast. I stayed up listening to the waves. It was past 2 when I heard footsteps on the porch, soft, uneven, like someone dragging their feet. I held my breath. The boards creaked once, then twice. When I finally looked through the window, the porch was empty, but there was a wet trail leading from the steps to the door. I didn't sleep after that. When Emma woke, I told her we should leave a day early. She frowned, asked if something was wrong. I said I just felt off. She teased me for being jumpy, but she agreed. While packing, she went outside to check the grill. I stayed inside to tidy up. When I looked out the window, she was standing by the dock, staring at the water. The morning light made everything look washed out, the trees, the lake, even her. She didn't move for a long time. Then she turned and walked back, her clothes damp at the bottom, like she'd stepped into the lake. We left before noon. The drive felt longer going back. Neither of us spoke much. I kept glancing at her reflection in the window. She looked pale, her lips slightly blue. I asked if she was cold. She said no, but her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking through water. That night, after dropping her off, I couldn't shake the feeling that something from the lake had followed us. The next day, I texted her, no reply. I called straight to voicemail. By evening, I drove to her apartment. Her car was there, but the lights were off. I knocked. No one answered. 2 days later, her sister called me. Emma hadn't shown up for work. They'd found her phone in her car, parked near the same lake. No sign of her. When I went back to the cabin with the search team, the waterline had risen, the dock was half submerged, and near the edge, tangled in reeds, was a red canvas shoe, one I'd seen before. Sometimes, in the spring, when the snow melts and the air smells like wet earth, I still hear that sound, the heavy splash echoing in my head, and I wonder if she ever really left that lake at all. It was early spring, the kind of morning when the air still had a bite, but the light felt softer, the trees just starting to show a hint of green. My girlfriend, Jenna, and I decided to take a short road trip that weekend. We'd been cooped up all winter, and she wanted to chase some sun, as she called it. We packed the car with snacks, bottled water, and a couple of light jackets, and set out before sunrise. The plan was simple: drive along the coast highway, stop wherever we felt like it, maybe grab lunch at a roadside diner. The drive started quiet, just the hum of the tires and the faint smell of coffee from Jenna's travel mug. The sky was pale pink, and mist clung to the fields along the road. Everything felt calm, and it was the first time in months I'd felt that kind of quiet stretch between us, not awkward, just peaceful. About 2 hours in, the road narrowed, running between clusters of trees and old wooden fences. Jenna leaned her head against the window and said, "This is nice," in a sleepy voice. A few minutes later, I noticed a figure ahead by the shoulder of the road, a woman standing near the guardrail. She wasn't hitchhiking, just standing still, facing the opposite direction, her hands hanging by her sides. At first, I thought she might be waiting for someone, but as we got closer, she didn't move, not even a glance toward the car. Her clothes looked plain, almost grey against the green around her. Jenna lifted her head. "Did you see that?" she asked. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. "Probably a local," I said, though something about her posture felt wrong. There was no bag, no phone, no car nearby, just her, and that stillness. We drove past without stopping, and after a few minutes, the air in the car felt heavier. I turned on the radio, but the signal crackled with static, and Jenna switched it off. "She was barefoot," Jenna said quietly. I hadn't noticed that. I told her it was probably nothing, but she didn't answer. About an hour later, we stopped at a small scenic pullout overlooking the water. It was windy, but bright, and the waves below crashed against jagged rocks. Jenna took a few pictures, and we sat on a bench eating granola bars. A man in a green jacket came by, nodded politely, and asked if we'd seen anyone walking along the road. "A woman, maybe 30, wearing grey clothes," he said. Jenna froze mid-bite. I told him we had, about an hour ago. "You might want to call the sheriff's office if you see her again," he said, frowning. "There was an accident near here a few days ago. Someone went missing." He thanked us and walked back to his truck. Jenna looked at me. "Do you think," she started, but didn't finish. I shrugged. The wind picked up, blowing sand into our shoes, and we decided to keep driving. As the day went on, the sunlight turned gold, stretching long shadows across the road. We drove past fields of daffodils and wooden barns with peeling paint. The kind of scenery that usually made Jenna smile, but she was quiet. Around 5, we stopped at a gas station that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. I went in to pay for gas, and the man behind the counter, a heavy-set guy with a baseball cap, looked at me strangely when I mentioned the woman we'd seen. "You're not the first ones," he said. "People say they see her this time of year. Always on the turnpike near mile marker 42. No one ever catches up to her." He said it casually, like he'd told the story too many times to care whether anyone believed him. When I came back to the car, Jenna was outside, standing near the passenger door, staring down the road. "She's there," she said. I followed her gaze. About 100 yards ahead, on the opposite side of the road, stood the same woman barefoot, facing away, her grey dress fluttering in the wind. I felt my stomach drop. There was no way she could have gotten here before us. We hadn't passed any cars or side roads. I started the engine, and Jenna climbed in without a word. We drove slowly past her this time. I tried not to look, but I couldn't help it. As we passed, I noticed her hands. They were wet, as if she'd just pulled them from water. She didn't move, didn't even breathe. Jenna turned her face toward the window, whispering, "Let's just go." We didn't talk for a long time after that. The road wound inland, and by the time we reached a diner, the sky was dimming. Inside, everything smelled like fried food and coffee. A waitress poured us water and smiled. Jenna barely touched her burger. I asked if she wanted to stay somewhere for the night, but she shook her head. "I just want to get home," she said. We left around 7. The air outside had cooled, and fog was starting to rise again. I turned onto the highway, headlights cutting through the grey. About 10 minutes later, I saw her again. This time, she was standing in the middle of the lane. I hit the brakes so hard the tires screamed. Jenna gasped, clutching the dashboard. The woman didn't move, just stood there, facing us. I blinked once, and she was gone. No shadow, no shape, just empty road ahead. We sat there for a moment, both of us breathing hard, the engine ticking softly. "I didn't imagine that," Jenna said. I didn't answer. We drove the rest of the way in silence. When we finally pulled into Jenna's driveway, it was past midnight. She went inside without saying much, just told me she'd call tomorrow. I sat in the car for a while before heading home. The next morning, she didn't call. I texted, then called, but there was no answer. Around noon, I drove to her place. Her car was still there, parked crookedly in the driveway. I knocked, called her name, and finally pushed the door open. The house was quiet. Her phone was on the counter, next to her keys. There was a faint smell of damp air, like after rain, even though the day was dry. I checked the bedroom empty. The back door was ajar, leading to the small patio. On the floor, there were wet footprints. Bare ones, small enough to be hers. They stopped halfway across the patio, like she'd walked out and vanished into thin air. For a long time, I stood there, waiting to hear something, anything. But the house stayed still. I finally walked outside. The sky was pale again, like the morning before. And just past the fence, by the edge of the road, I saw her grey dress, hair hanging loose, facing away. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Someone stood next to her, wearing the same clothes Jenna had worn the day before, her denim jacket, her white sneakers. They didn't move, they just stood there, side by side, facing the road. And when I blinked, both of them were gone. Spring on the farm always started the same way. The air smelled like rain and soil, and the sound of frogs came back at night. By mid-March, the fields behind the house were soft enough to plough, and the wind carried that damp, cold sweetness that only lasted a few weeks before summer heat took it away. That morning, I woke up before sunrise because the cows had been restless. The barn was just a few hundred feet from the house, and when I stepped outside, I could see Miss lying low over the pasture. The air felt colder than it looked. I thought maybe a coyote had come too close again. When I got to the fence, I noticed something strange in the east field. The soil there had a dark patch, circular, maybe 6 or 7 feet wide. It looked wetter than the rest, like it had soaked up too much water overnight. I crouched down and touched it. It wasn't mud. It was sticky, almost oily. I went back to the barn, finished feeding the cows, and told myself I'd check again later, when the sun came out. But all morning, I kept looking toward that patch through the window. Around 10, my girlfriend, Megan, came by with coffee and a bag of blueberry muffins. She'd driven over from town, still wearing her spring jacket, and she smiled when she saw me staring out at the field. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "There's a spot out there. Looks weird, maybe fertilizer." Didn't put any down yet. We walked out together. The ground was still soft enough that her boots sank a little with every step. The patch looked darker in daylight, almost black now, like burnt soil. There was a faint smell coming from it, not exactly rot, more like metal and wet weeds. Megan squatted near it, sniffed the air, and frowned. "It's kind of gross. Yeah, don't touch it." We stood there a while before going back. I told myself it might be oil runoff from the tractor, even though I hadn't driven it that far. That afternoon, clouds started rolling in. By evening, it was raining again. The next morning, I went out early. The patch was bigger, maybe 2 feet wider, spreading out like spilled ink. The grass around it had turned grayish, and a few crows were walking near it, picking at something I couldn't see. When I got closer, the smell hit stronger, sharp and sour. I kicked at the edge with my boot, and the soil broke apart like it had no structure left. Beneath the surface, there was something pale, like fabric. I bent down and realized it wasn't fabric. It looked like a piece of plastic, or maybe skin. I froze. My first thought was that it might be a buried animal, something that died over the winter and surfaced with the thaw. But the shape was wrong, flat and stretched. I grabbed a stick, poked at it, and it tore slightly. Beneath it was another layer, darker, slicker. I dropped the stick and backed off. Later that day, Megan came back again. She noticed I was shaken, and asked what happened. I told her. She wanted to see it herself, but when we walked out, the patch was covered in water from last night's rain. Whatever I'd seen was gone under a thin film of muddy water. "Probably nothing," she said, but she sounded uncertain. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard the cows again, low moaning sounds that didn't stop. I went out with a flashlight. The rain had stopped, and fog hung across the fields. The beam caught movement near the fence line. At first, I thought it was one of the cows, but it was standing to upright. The shape turned slightly, then dropped to the ground fast, like someone crawling. I felt my chest tighten. I called out, but there was no response. I ran toward it, my boots slapping the wet ground. When I reached the fence, there was nothing there, just a dark patch again, now shimmering with moisture. Something was sticking out of it. A hoof. I reached through the fence. It wasn't a real hoof, it was soft, half-formed, like it had been molded out of the soil. I yanked my hand back. The patch was bubbling faintly. I could hear a wet sound, like water boiling deep underground. The next morning, Megan came early. She saw my face and didn't even ask at first. I told her what I'd seen. She didn't believe me, not really, but she could tell I wasn't making it up. We went to the field again. The spot was gone. The soil looked normal, a little darker maybe, but solid. "You're exhausted," she said. "You've been working non-stop, maybe." We went back inside. I made eggs and toast. The day went quiet. Around noon, she went out to her car to grab her jacket. After a while, I realized she hadn't come back. I walked outside, calling her name. The yard was empty. Her car was still there. The driver's door open. Her phone was in the cup holder. I ran toward the field. The air smelled like rain again, even though the sky was clear. There, in the middle of the east field, the dark patch had returned larger than ever. In the center of it, her jacket was lying flat, half sunk in the soil. I ran to it and pulled, but the ground held it tight. The smell was overwhelming now, sweet and metallic. I dropped to my knees and dug with my hands. The dirt was warm. Something shifted underneath. For a moment, I thought I saw her hand, but it wasn't her hand. It was something that looked like one, made of the same pale, soft material I'd seen before. It twitched when I touched it. I stumbled back, breathing hard, mud all over my arms. I shouted her name again, louder this time. The field stayed silent. Then, from somewhere below the surface, I heard it, a faint gurgling sound, almost like someone trying to breathe through water. That night, I sat on the porch with every light in the house on. I didn't sleep. The cows were quiet. The rain started again near dawn, soft and steady. When I looked out, the field looked normal. By noon, Megan's car was gone. I never saw her drive away. Every spring since then, the same spot darkens after the first big rain. Nothing grows there. When the wind shifts, I can still smell that metallic sweetness, faint but real, drifting through the open window.